My name is Pascal Saura. I'm French, but I've been working and living in the United States for the past 20 years. And as of this morning when I checked, I still haven't lost my accent. Another thing I realized when I joined and started working in the United States is that people get usually very confused about my first name. For them, Pascal is the name of a programming language. It makes them think of the French mathematician Blaise Pascal. And Blaise Pascal was also a philosopher who said famously, « Tout le malheur des hommes vient d'une seule chose, qui est de ne pas savoir rester en repos dans une chambre. » Or in English, all man's misery is derived from not being able to sit in a quiet room alone. So I bet that Pascal would be very pleased with the topic of my conversation this morning, since new technologies are actually allowing him to stay put nice and quiet in his room while working. My topic is indeed telework. I will talk about the rise of telework and how the need and the difficulty to innovate and create in virtual workspaces is actually testing the limitations and the limits of telework. I will then bring in this topic of knowledge management, and I will argue that KM is exactly what we need to bridge the gap between the full potential of telework and what we see as a benefit of telework today. So knowledge management will do the trick, but it will have to evolve in order to get there. And so I will propose some strategies so KM can evolve and bridge the gap between telework as we know it today and telework as it could be expanding in the future. Why I'm interested in this topic? I'm not a researcher. I'm not a consultant or a vendor. I'm a KM practitioner. And I started working at the French Embassy in Washington, D.C. I was soon coordinating a lot of projects with colleagues located in other English-speaking countries around the world. And when I moved on to the World Bank, this situation really intensified. And I had to work with a lot of people overseas. This is the best moment, by the way, to clarify the fact that this presentation does not reflect the position of the World Bank. I'm here on my behalf and not on the behalf of the organization. But it's still relevant to talk a little bit about the World Bank as a backdrop for my remarks. As most of you know, the World Bank is a development bank. Its mission is to end poverty and boost shared prosperity. And it does so by addressing local challenges with global knowledge. So the World Bank is about lending and knowledge. It's even more today a knowledge institution, a knowledge bank, than it is a financing institution. And so that's why I think that knowledge management is really a key function there. So I'm working currently with the water global practice. And we have 130 locations around the world. It's 60% of our work staff is actually located outside of the headquarters in DC. And so what you see plotted on the map are all the locations where I have colleagues with whom I'm working on a very regular basis. So that's how I gain very much an interest in telework and how I gain also some experience in dealing with it. What do I mean when I say telework? There's a lot of words out there. I will actually use it in its broadest definition possible, which is working from a distance, working away from organizational centers and co-workers. To refine the definition, we got 4 dimensions. The first one is work location. Teleworking means working from a field office, from home, from a coffee shop, from a telework center, or really from anywhere. It is completely underpinned and helped by infotech and connectivity. It relies on it to exist. There are 2 more dimensions to telework. One is time distribution, and the other one is employment status. Some telecommuters are telecommuting occasionally, others are telecommuting all the time. Some are regular staff, others are freelancers. The reason why I'm putting those definitions out there is because my point is that I think that all these dimensions are going to be intensified in the years to come, and they're going to push the limits of telework. So the ultimate expression of teleworking is the digital nomads. The term digital nomads was the title of a book published in 1997 by 2 people named Makimoto and Manners. and they were reflecting on the progress of telecommunication. And they were saying, basically, we should very soon be free from our homes and offices to work. And they have this wonderful quote here: "We will travel the world hunting down information and relationships, much as our ancestors stalked the plains for prey," which is quite a vivid image to have here. And they were reflecting on about 20 years of history already of telecommuting, a word that was coined in 1973 by the father of telecommuting, Jack Mills. In 1995, Woody Leonard says, "Work is something we do, not something we travel to." Quite a nice way to represent what telework is. In 2006, a study conducted with Best Buy, Dow Chemical, and a lot of other companies claims that telecommuters are 35 to 40% more productive than traditional workers. In 2009, IBM, which has been a precursor, they started the first telecommuting policies in the 1980s. By 2009, 40% of their employees are working remotely. And they estimate by then to have had a cumulated savings of $2 billion. In 2012, another study shows that 1 in 5 workers around the world telecommutes regularly, and 1 in 10 works from home every day. And going back to solely the United States, it has been calculated in 2015 that telecommuting population has increased 115% in 10 years. So this rise of telework is not strange. It didn't happen overnight, but it's nothing to be too surprised about. We are more than ever connected. The connectivity has been improving a lot. Knowledge, a long time ago, has been freed up from the brains when it was trapped into books and writing, where it could be disseminated around the world, and is now ubiquitous thanks to the digital revolution. And at the same time, or maybe because of that, our economy has evolved from agriculture to industry, to the industry of services, and to what we call today the knowledge economy, where the goods and the value we produce is essentially immaterial and virtual. So much so that the old office should be a thing of the past, and the traffic jams going to this office should have totally disappeared. The telework is also good for so many things, for employee satisfaction, for productivity, for 24/7 coverage in an increasingly globalized economy, and also for expanding your talent pool. It also makes total sense for global operations and for business continuity. In this town in 2009-2010, we were hit by a series of snowstorms. The media called that Snowmageddon, and everything was paralyzed. And as a result of that storm, the federal government decided to ramp up their game on telecommuting. That gave way to the 2010 Telework Enhancing Act. And it was calculated at that time that every day where services could be rendered by the government by telecommuters were saving actually $30 million in productivity to the American public. So telework is really good for the bottom line as well. And it's good for the environment. A Californian study showed that a family telecommuting is actually 48% less on the road than a family that doesn't telecommute. So that's a lot of greenhouse gas emissions that are saved here. But not everything is rosy or linear in the rise of telework. A survey actually, done by Ipsos in 2012 showed that 50% of telecommuters are reporting feeling of isolation. A majority of them feel like they are passed for promotion because they are not in a physical space with their coworkers or in the headquarters. And of course, work-life balance is definitely an issue. That's the employee's perspective. From the employer's perspective, things have been moving as well. You all remember that in 2012, Yahoo famously canceled its telecommuting policy. And in 2017, IBM, which is the poster child for telecommuting, they were in it since 1980, decided to recall thousands of their employees into physical hubs. Why are they doing this? They're saying that telecommuting is bad for collaboration, for speed of reaction, that innovation is difficult to actually engineer when everybody is sitting in a distributed work environment. And that culture, of course, when you don't have people in the same building is something that's difficult to actually nurture and build. And we have more disturbing elements. Does anybody know what this is? Yeah, I think I heard it. It's an open workspace, it's Facebook. What's interesting is that those big tech companies, which basically enable the world we live in today and enable all this connectivity, those big tech companies never really embrace telecommuting. They have all the means, but they don't do it. You know, why? This is an office of Facebook somewhere in Europe. It's everybody under one roof. They are kind of crammed in that space too, but the idea is that they can rub shoulder, they can actually, through serendipity, come up with bright and innovative ideas. They are very encouraged to be under one roof. And when you're looking at Google, Google invested $2 billion to have real estate downtown Manhattan, where they could have 3,000 employees working in the same space. And what you have on the screen here is a sketch for the Googleplex design, and also the new headquarters. And as you can see, that it's basically a miniature city where people work and live in the same space all the time. That's the new Googleplex. And to me, it's very reminiscent of what we would find typically in Europe or in the US in the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. That's the company town, right? And so instead of pushing the limit of what we can do virtually online, it seems that the digital world we're living in is pushing forces of agglomeration. Instead of distributing the workforce, everything comes together in bigger cities, in digital hubs and mega cities. This is a representation of fintech hubs. And so those cities are becoming bigger, and the rules of connectivity are actually redefining the map of the world. You see here those massive centers that are concentrating wealth, ideas, brain power, innovation, and in between, a lot of empty spaces. It used to be that big cities were actually helping the vast expanse of land between them. They were also profiting from the expansion of the city. Not so much anymore. That's something that has changed in the 1980s. And so now the hinterland of San Francisco, for example, is Shenzhen, not so much Middle America anymore. And so we end up with a problem for economic development, of course, with cities that are becoming too big. You've got extreme commuters which are capturing the headlines, and basically that's probably not a good development. So that's a knowledge paradox, right? Knowledge is immaterial, it's virtual, and yet it seems that we more and more need it to be created in one physical space. Yeah. The more virtual we become, the more we are coalescing in big cities, and the more we need to be close together. There are some reasons for collaboration, speed, innovation, culture. It's also that big cities have the higher education institutions, which supply brains. Cities are where business and policymakers are meeting, they're making deals. That's where chance encounters can happen. And it's where, because of the density of population, that's where big ideas can take form. And I would say that they keep on growing because the technology is still insufficient. We're taking for granted that technology today is completely allowing telework. It's not entirely true. So this is some data from 2014 about technology adoption in high-income countries. So what you see here, do I have a pointer? Yes, wonderful. So on the horizontal axis, you have the technologies, digital technologies from the simpler PC all the way to radio frequency identification and cloud computing ERP. On the vertical axis, you got the rate of adoption. These are high-income companies. And so what you see is that we can basically take connectivity for granted. You know, all those companies have a PC, internet, broadband. But as soon as you're talking about productivity, that's a different story. Just look at ERP or CRM. That should be the backbone of any company, how we work online. But in fact, the adoption here is 30%. So which seems to indicate that we're connected, all right, but can we really work online? And that picture becomes even more problematic when you step out of a high-income country and you're looking at the entire world. Courtesy of the digital divide, it's more difficult even to work online around the world. So we're connected, but can we really work and be productive? We know that a lot of things cannot be done virtually. The science is very conclusive there. We know that a handshake, for example, is sending reward signals to the brain. You know, how do you replicate this in a virtual meeting? Shared context, body language is very important in how we make decisions, how we exchange information, and how we come up with ideas. And so for as long as technology is not able to actually replicate this, we have a problem. Because in fact, telework is here to stay. And I'm saying that telework is here to stay not because I think that it's a good thing or because it's my own opinion. It's because analysts have showed this. You remember that survey in 2012? This is establishing that the developing world is emerging economies are actually way ahead of, say, Europe or North America in their practice for telecommuting. They're telecommuting more than we do. So that's something that's definitely coming. China, India, a lot of countries and big cities in Latin America have embraced telecommuting. And then you have also the very well-known development of the millennials and the way they work. Work economists are predicting that by 2030, 50% of the workforce will be freelancing versus being in regular staff, which means that increasingly, workspaces are going to be atomized, they're going to be virtual, and they're going to be fast. So what does this mean for KM? Well, I think that this is a prime moment for knowledge management. I think that we have that disconnect. This is what telework can do. This is how much telework is going to be present in the future. But we still have a gap. We cannot innovate. We cannot really create online the way we do face-to-face. Knowledge management will bridge that gap, but it will change also a little bit in the process. For the purpose of examining the consequences on KM, I will define knowledge management as a way to bring value to a company or an organization by helping that company or organization in avoiding past mistakes, repeating successes, and sparking innovation. And we typically do this through expertise, communities, and contents and technologies. And so a few strategies. First, I would argue that knowledge management is about bringing two kinds of knowledge. First, what I would call go-to knowledge, and the second will be knowledge to go further. So what is go-to knowledge? Well, the go-to knowledge is the knowledge that your frontline is asking from you. They're engaged in the field, delivering value for your company or organization. They need answers quick. What have we done here? Who is competent in that? Who can help me? How much money do we have to do this, et cetera, et cetera? What is the cutting edge technology for this thing? You need to put in place a system to answer those questions pretty fast. You provide just-in-time advisory services. And what you need to do more prevalently when you're working online is to make it visible. The workforce is distributed. They cannot just go and knock at your door. They need to understand where the help is going to be coming from. So for this, we're using help desks, centers of excellence, repositories, and I would say a little bit of branding as well is very important. So you can shine like a beacon of light for people to find you right away. For the water department for which I'm working at the World Bank, for example, we branded the help desk as Ask Water. So it took a little while, but after 18 months, 2 years maybe, absolutely everybody knows that if they have any question, technical question about how the organization should be presented, etc., they just have to remember that one word to get in touch with the whole network of experts that we have, all the resources, all the database, all the terms of reference and CVs that we have at their disposal. So a little bit of branding and being out there very visible for what the teams are demanding. There's a different kind of knowledge that we're helping here, is the knowledge to go further. This one is a little bit different and a little bit more difficult. This is about the cutting edge idea. This is about the latest technology. This is about the corporate priority. If you're sitting at the center, you're thinking about tomorrow and how to help your team succeed in the long term. But the problem is that your front line is only thinking about today, and that's perfectly legitimate. That's the emergency of the day-to-day grind and everything they have to do to survive. And so there's a massive disconnect here between corporate strategies and the day-to-day of the front line. It's already a classic problem when you're not online and when you don't have a distributed workforce. But when you're in a virtual work environment, then that becomes a real big problem. Your message doesn't come across that nicely. So by default, we are using e-learning for this, right? We're going to pipe down some information to the teams, which may or may not take it. I would propose two other strategies. The first one is the giving hand strategy. And this one is very simple and straightforward. As you're delivering seamlessly, in a frictionless manner, all those answers to the front line, you're also adding a slice of the knowledge to go further. You ask for this, here it is, and by the way, there's also that very cool stuff that's coming in. You could find that helpful. The other strategy is a little more complicated to represent, is what I would call the leading answer strategy. As we say, a leading question. You ask a leading question, and you're kind of forcing the answer from your interlocutor. The leading answer is exactly that. I'll give an example. When I joined the French embassy in the United States, I was in charge of overseeing the cultural and language centers all through the United States. And one of my first tasks was to drive the adoption for a new educational standard, which comprised a very cool evaluation scale for foreign languages. It was top-notch. It was built by the Council of Europe. It was really working and bringing us to the next phase of language teaching. The problem was that my front line, which was language and cultural centers, couldn't care for it. They could see the merits. They could see that it was very nicely done, and it was really useful, but they already had that. They were not asking for it, and they were happy with what they had. So they wouldn't take it, basically. Nice, but I didn't ask for this. Instead, they were asking for other stuff, plenty of other stuff. And one of the things they were asking for was a way to connect with their audience outside of business hours. Of course, you have websites, but websites are passive, and you're only getting information. You don't commit to anything as a prospective student when you're just watching a website. You see a phone number. You might call the next day when the office is open, but that's it. So our centers felt very strongly that they needed something more. So what we did is that we built for them an online placement test. So now, if I want to learn French, it's 9 p.m., it's after dinner, I'm thinking about my future, I want to learn a new language. I'm going online, I can do something about it. There's a placement test, I'm starting to talk about my level, etc. And I'm a lot more engaged. And so our language centers were thrilled to have this in their toolbox and to be able to engage with their audience. They took it right away. It was for free. It was online. Beautiful. The only catch was that along with this online placement test, we had put the brand new evaluation scale that we were struggling to push just months before. And because people loved the tool so much and because it was so useful, they kind of felt naturally that they had to adopt the new educational standard and to adopt the new evaluation scale. It was seamless, and now they had a reason to do so. So that's what I would call the leading answer or the leading solution. It's when you provide a tool or a service that actually changes the behavior or the response of your interlocutor. It's very important when you have a virtual workspace. And so this highlights also the importance of tools. And for this, KM has to work with technology. The challenge is to deliver insight and productivity across time and space. You need AI. You're going to need machine learning. You're going to need all the technological help you can find. But it cannot be at your expense. KM has a major role to play in doing the business process analysis and seeing where knowledge needs to be injected. And it needs to relay those requirements to IT. So it means that it also needs to have a seat at the table and influence massively governance around IT decisions. Nothing really new here. Technology will help speed up the process. The challenge that you have online with a distributed, atomized, virtual, and fast workspace is that you have workers flying in and out of projects. They need eye contact briefings and debriefings. And so more and more we will move away from the massive onboarding sessions that tend to last for a week with then more activities along years. Onboarding, especially for temporary staff, will have to happen in a moment. So how do we get the right information to actually deliver that insight to the new workers very quickly? We will have to rely on knowledge maps. So what I did every time I had to work in any company was to really quickly map where the resources are, who knows what, where are the different websites and repositories, and make that visible to everybody. Usually it's not useful to everyone, but the super users, the knowledge management officers, need to be able to rely on it every day to actually deliver those micro onboardings, to allow these check-in, check-outs with workers which are flying in and out of projects. And so it's all about expertise. The most important part of a knowledge map, I believe, is how you've mapped expertise. And the difficulty when you're looking at how to identify experts internally is how you identify experts across multiple dimensions. When people are coming to me, they're never asking for a water expert. That would be just too easy. We've got them all. They usually ask for something a lot more precise, like, for example, a drought management expert who has experience in investment lending in country X in Africa and can speak French. So all those dimensions have to be taken into consideration. And when you do your search in the company directory is not going to give you that. It's only titles, unless you did something to the company directory. And that something is to build a very robust topic and business taxonomy, so everybody has the same language about what expertise means. And then you need to work with IT to customize your company directory and to have customized search running against it. So I was very fortunate when I joined the World Bank to be made project manager for something we call the Skill Finder, which is doing exactly that, which is looking at the whole wealth of HR data, pulling all the project experience, the language, the past history, etc., and is also asking our staff to augment that with their specialization running against the taxonomy. And this is what our help desk, Ask Water, is using every day to actually connect challengers and requesters, people with questions, to people who can actually answer those questions. So that's internally. Externally, we also need to be able to mobilize external resources fairly quickly. We have to become extremely proficient in social media, in using the talent marketplaces out there, and LinkedIn comes to mind. That's something with which we must be working. In my current job, I'm running a small shop called the Water Expertise Facility, and that's our job. Where every time there's a need and an expertise that we cannot fulfill in-house, we then need to very quickly turn outside, identify people, experts around the world who will be able to help bridge the knowledge gap. It takes a little bit of practice and some processes, but it has become, I would say, a good 40% of my job. And so people are very important in this mix. And here I would argue that KM has to become way closer to HR when it's not already close. It's about managing a cohesive experience between HR, learning, and KM. We're all in this together. I would say that we need to embed KM with HR or vice versa. We need to be close. Basically, what I'm missing today is that access to HR data, which is not always completely open. I would argue that we definitely need to be there. I don't know what it will take, but it's very important. Why? Because we see the knowledge gaps. We see where the resources are, what we're missing, and where we're not performing. So that's a big part of what HR needs to understand when hiring people and when managing that workforce, right? So we need to integrate hiring, training, performance management systems, and we also need to have a say in deployment strategies. It seems counterintuitive, but we should have a say in how we define the blend between on-site versus remote. You know? Because we know where the knowledge needs are. So we're the best place to say, you know what, I think that we have too many people in the center, and we should instead deploy in the field where I see big knowledge gaps. And we should be having a say on the policies about telework and defining the blend between contract and staff. So that's my push for HR and KM to come way closer. And part of managing expertise and being able to create innovation, quick connections, which in turn create value in a knowledge economy, we also need to help build more dynamic and rich profiles where we blend personal input and data-driven factoids. The idea here is that we're in our place when we are helping building these online profiles for all the staff and all the consultants for that matter. So when you have this first meeting with somebody you never met and which is sitting thousands of kilometers away, you know a whole lot of things about them. It sets expectations. It gives you a good entry into what they know, what they want, what they're bringing to the table, and this accelerates a lot the kind of progress you're going to be able to do online. And by the same way, you must be building trusts fast through rituals. As KM experts, we need to create spaces for informal interactions. We need to promote closeness, provide understanding, which means that we need to become super duper community management experts. I'm not a great community management expert, but that's what I'm going to be working on in the next years or so, because I understand that this is the wave of the future for knowledge management. When people are not sitting around you, you need to be having this community working virtually. And this has a backbone, which is organizational network analysis. You need to understand who knows what, who's connected to whom, who are the super connectors, where are the lone wolves, and how all these communities are working together. You will set up routine check-ins at all levels to create routines, core hours. If you have a very distributed workforce, it's not always possible, but you need to define a number of hours where everybody is supposed to be online, connected, and where you can connect to all your different operations. And of course, you need to define the balance between virtual and co-located events, so that you become overall a cultural attaché, to have a play on word here. You need to support the company culture among a distributed and atomized workforce. That's obviously the biggest challenge. Culture doesn't happen overnight. It's something very fine. How do you do this online? Well, I don't have a good solution for this, but what I would say is that we'll have to fall back more and more when you have coworkers that are coming in for 3 months, 6 months, coming out. You actually fall back on the brand of your organization or company. You need to use that. When I'm working with somebody for 3 months, I know that they won't get the culture of the World Bank. That's just not possible in 3 months. But instead, I need to work with their expectation of what the World Bank is, based on what the news and media are saying, based on what our external communication is saying. I'm going to have to use that brand to, so we speak the same language. But it also means that we can go a little further. If you want to help build that culture in a virtual, atomized workspace, you need to also talk to communications and influence the way they talk about your company. So the knowledge message is also there. And of course, so it's storytelling, champions, incentives, aligns with the core values of our culture is something that we need to be communicating in these virtual workspaces. And so altogether, we're becoming, I can see us becoming chief innovators. because we're creating the space for innovation. We're bringing together in-house expertise with global input across fast, atomized, and virtual workspaces. That's a big work. That's a complex work with tons of different disciplines in it, as I hope I just showed today. And so I think that as a profession, knowledge management experts are really at a crossroads. Faced with this big complexity of changing workplaces, we can do two things. We can either specialize, or we can integrate and absorb. Either we specialize and we become great community managements, wonderful IT integrators, big technologists, or we become publishers, and we do this one thing very well. Or we can choose to embrace all the different disciplines and do something a lot more difficult, which is to actually orchestrate all the different dimensions, what needs to happen virtually for our companies to deliver innovation and creativity. Well, personally, I think that this second job, which is bigger, is also more preferable. That's a job I hope we will have in the future in line with all the C executive suite. And I personally can't wait to be there. Thank you very much. So I will take a few questions if you want to. Yes?
Back.
Hello.
You were talking about HR and really partnering up with HR. Have you had, what kind of experiences have you had thus far with gaining alignment with that group? And have you had any challenges? And what would you suggest to other people who are trying to merge thoughts with HR and join together?
That's a very interesting and important question. So personally, I didn't have such a great time with HR. I even have a slide about it. Not that I couldn't work with HR, it's always possible, but when we were working on these online profiles, which are basically knowledge tools, the tension was always that a lot of people in HR, not everybody, but a lot of people are here to protect the information. Sometimes to a fault. I was told, for example, why do we need to show the work history of people in our organization? And I'm sorry, that's not confidential information. That needs to be able to come out, and that's absolutely critical to how you connect with people and how you understand them. So yeah, I had that experience, but I heard, for example, a speaker yesterday was actually embedded into HR and was working there for all the right reasons, I'm sure, but this tension definitely exists. I don't exactly know how to speak the language of HR in a way that would convince them to unpack this. Yes?
Have you considered then going for that kind of data outside, like LinkedIn or something, embracing some of the external networks within that?
Absolutely, yeah, and I think it's absolutely necessary. And LinkedIn, for example, is a wonderful tool for consultants and temporary workforce. That's absolutely essential. But when you are turning internally to people who have been in the company for 15 years, for example, or 20 years, then you actually have richer data and much more interesting data to mine inside. So the truth is that you really need to do both. Yeah. As a knowledge worker, well, many ways, right? And what I can think on top of my head is that, for example, when you have, this knowledge to go further I was talking about, well, you need champions. You need all the channels you can use to actually push to the front line, new ideas, cutting edge ideas, etc. If your organizational network analysis helped you identify superconnectors, you first talk to them. They are your champions. As a knowledge worker, You use this also to understand where you have disconnects. If you're saying, for example, that every water project should have a social component in it, and your network, organizational network analysis shows you that the social development people are never connected with the water people, then you have a problem. And to flip that to the level of the individual, it also means that for your career development, a sound organizational network analysis is going to be able to give you a pathway towards who to talk to, where to go, what to learn, so you're actually more integrated in the whole enterprise. That's a fair answer to your question.
I was wondering what guidance you have for organizations that are trying to formalize a telework policy that feels fair to employees but also is beneficial to the organization.
Wow, that's a big one. So obviously, all the recommendations that I gave or all the propositions that I have are around how to do telework right and actually get to a point where you can do everything through telework, including innovation and including being creative. So all those points would have to be taken into consideration. But at the basis, it's really an analysis. You know, what's your business line? What are your business lines? Who are you trying to help? Where are the needs? And so that's work distribution. If you're talking about having people just not going to the office, I would say that, well, there are checklists out there. There's the big question of how often they should be coming to the physical office and how you build that trust, that company culture around it. So all the policy should actually derive from this. All right? You're trying to save a little bit of money. You're trying to make people happier and more productive. But at the same time, your higher goal is actually to deliver a product X or Y or that service. That trumps everything else. That everything needs to be tailored toward that objective first, right? So that's a guiding principle.
System somewhat like that. But, thank you all very much. If you have any other questions, please come up.
Thank you, David, and thank you to you all. Thanks. Much appreciated.